Thank you very much. Welcome to the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. We're happy to have you all here today. One of my jobs as Associate Curator is to manage this institution's ongoing oral history project. Since we opened almost 25 years ago, we've recorded over 1,200 interviews with people from around the world about their memories of the 1960s, President Kennedy, and the day of the assassination. If you'd like to share your own memories of that time period, you can contact us via our website, jfk.org. We can arrange an interview in person at the museum if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or by telephone if you live out of the area. And you can be a part of this tapestry of history that we're preserving here. As Associate Curator, in doing these interviews, every so often a unique storyteller emerges, and we like to invite those special guests back to the museum to speak in a public forum, and that's what our Living History series is all about. And today is a very special guest that's going to be sharing his story. Mickey Carroll was a journalist for over 4 decades. He was working at the New York Herald Tribune on the day of the assassination, but he went on to work at the New York Times, and today he is the director of the Quinnipiac University Polling Institute. He was here that weekend, witnessed the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, then came back to Dallas to cover the trial of Jack Ruby in 1964. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming Mickey Carroll to tell his story. Well, Mickey, welcome back to Dallas. You haven't been here since 1964, 50 years ago.
Long time.
Do you want to make any comments before we get started?
Just this, and I mean, I'm glad that all of you came, and it's nice to be here, but you have to understand how thoroughly unimportant I am. I was a newspaper reporter. I was there to write a little sentence about Oswald being taken out of the jail, and turned out to be a little more than a sentence, clearly. But Steve mentioned this book, and I'm not trying to sell books. I don't make any money if they do buy them, but there's been 50 years of conspiracy stuff, junk, essentially, that's been publicized and has overtaken what really happened. The only story about what really happened was the Warren Commission, which is unreadable. I challenge anybody to read the darn thing. It's accurate, it's all there, but you can't read it. So I tried to put together a simple chronicle of what happened. That's it. That's why I wrote it, and here I am.
Well, let's go back more than 50 years. November 22nd, 1963, you wake up in New York City, and by the time you end your day, you are elbow to elbow with reporters from around the world in the corridors of Dallas Police Headquarters. Let's start at the beginning. How did you find out about the assassination?
Well, actually, I woke up in New Jersey where I lived, took the train into New York, and walking up Broadway, there were people clustered around parked cars, listening to the radios from inside the cars, and the president had been shot at. By the time I got to the Herald Tribune, you walked past the old opera, the Metropolitan Opera House, down the street, up the elevator. Everybody knew that the president had been killed. And Buddy Weiss, the Metro editor of the Trib, said to me, look, he said, we're sending Jimmy Breslin. A lot of you have probably read stuff by Jimmy Breslin, a terrific columnist. Bob Byrd, our #1 reporter. We had covered the Eichmann trial and stuff like that. And Buddy said, he cleaned out the cash drawer on the city desk and said, take this money to those guys. They're getting on an airplane. And he said, why don't you go with them? Give them a hand. Do legwork for Bob. And so I went.
What was the atmosphere like? I'm picturing this airplane filled with nothing but journalists, all rushing to cover what will be the biggest story of their careers.
Well, all scared a little bit. Reporters, everybody thinks reporters are like they see on television, very full of themselves. Most reporters are sort of shy. They grew up as readers. So everybody on the plane was a little bit scared about how are we going to cover this. B, are we in the beginning of World War III? Because it developed as it went along. People knew the president had been killed. Was anything else going on? Like the Lincoln assassination? And thirdly, we were citizens of the United States, and our president had been murdered. So there was the apprehension of covering a big story and the sadness of being a citizen of a wounded country.
Now, this scene that we're looking at here, Dallas Police Headquarters, looks like a chaotic situation.
It was.
How did the Dallas police manage all of you guys?
Well, the Dallas police really didn't manage us. They just welcomed us. Now, a couple of things. The Dallas police have gotten a bad rap for that. They really weren't bad at all. They were helpful. They were courteous, but they were overwhelmed. There was a little thing called a press room on, I think it was the fifth floor, third or fifth, whatever it was. And so there's a murder, there's something, so 3 or 4 reporters show up, and that's where they work. But this wasn't 3 or 4 reporters. This was hundreds. I mean, every airplane that landed disgorged reporters. Every time the elevator went up in police headquarters, people came pouring out. You were elbow to elbow, Oswald among them. They showed him around, and understandably, to prove to people they weren't beating him up, which would be the supposition, huh? So it was chaos, but it was not chaos out of stupidity. It was chaos partly out of just being nice guys. They were under orders, and this not because of this thing, but some time back, the police headquarters, police department, had been given a written order. You are to be cooperative with reporters, not if you feel like it, not if you want to be, but you are charged, said the police chief, with being cooperative with reporters. So they were. Nobody understood or appreciated that there'd be platoons of us around, but there we were.
Tell us about some of the communication challenges you had, like finding a telephone.
Well, you got cell phones, most of you? There were no cell phones. Remember that? The Dick Tracy thing he had a radio on his wrist? That was science fiction. But we didn't have any of that. So if you wanted to get to your office or talk to anybody, you had to find a phone. I remember later down Mississippi, doing the civil rights stuff, you're driving along a road and, there's a telephone wires along, and you look, and finally a wire goes into a house, and bingo, you go in and you say to the people in this farmhouse, hey, I'm a reporter, could I borrow your phone and stuff? That's what you had to do. I still don't remember how we in the Dallas situation, how we got it. I don't remember how we did it, but we did, because after Ruby shot Oswald, I finally got to a phone, so I called my city desk, the Herald Tribune, and I said, hey, Don, this guy got shot. He said, I know, we saw it on television. In other words, they had all seen it same time we did.
Well, let's speak to that, because this was the moment when this shift occurred in how we get our news.
Oh, you betcha. Look, you all watch television. You see those things like breaking news and so forth. Well, breaking news is a lousy way to get news. What reporters did, when I taught journalism, I tell the kids, look, you see news in neat little columns in newspapers or nice, orderly reports on television or radio. It's not the way news happens. News is like a great big jumble of sloppy stuff on a table, and a reporter's job is to make sense of it, to make a pattern out of that news. Well, what you saw in the Kennedy assassination was the attempt to make a pattern out of it. You saw reporters reporting, and that can be a sort of messy business. You ask a lot of questions, and some of them turn out to be irrelevant. Some of them turn out to be unimportant, whatever. But here, all of a sudden, the process of gathering news was right in front of everybody. So you saw all the sloppiness, all the false starts, all the pluses and minuses of it. And now it's a regular thing. You expect to see that. But then a reporter's job was to get the stuff together, distill it, put it together, say what it is. In the Kennedy assassination, people saw reporters working. You told me, Steve, that somebody or other came at one of these things and said about how the Eastern press was impolite. All the press is impolite. It's not to be an Eastern. A reporter's job is to get a story. I mean, you don't elbow people or jump on them, but you're single-minded. Your story, you talk, blah, 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 blah. You do your thing. And, of course, it's not often very polite.
Besides police headquarters the night of the assassination, you also went over to Oswald's rooming house on North Beckley.
Yeah, well, just step back just a second. I told you, Bob Byrd, senior reporter and a very good one at the Trib, his job was going to be to write a reprise of the whole shebang. And my job was to do legwork for him, to go out and get interview and so forth. So he said to me as we on the plane, he said, look, why don't you go to police headquarters and get some color and some information? And he said, then we'll talk tomorrow about how to put together other stuff. So I was at headquarters, and I stayed in this mess, this chaos, until the trip's deadline. Well, I've forgotten what it was. But then I could leave. And I thought, I'm not getting anything here. We're all a bunch of reporters who don't know exactly what's going on, hollering questions and so forth. So I said, okay, Oswald, I'll go out to see what he lived like. So I took a cab down at 10-something or other, North Beckley, as I recall, and it was a rooming house. And my grandma ran a rooming house up in Paterson, New Jersey once. It's I don't think they exist anymore, rooming houses. This was where, men, lonely, usually single men, would live in a room and go to work and stuff. It was not a very happy kind of life, I don't think. But anyway, I got to North Beckley, and the cops in Dallas, as I said, they were nice guys, they were doing a job, but they were overwhelmed. The president had been murdered in their city. So I got to the rooming house, and the cops had been there, but they weren't there now. And now there'd be yellow tape around the room, and there'd be a cop stationed there telling you to stay away or whatever. Well, there wasn't anybody. I walked in. Earlene Johnson, I remember, the lady was the landlady. She said, "Oh, come on in. You want to see his room?" So I went. Yeah, so. And his room was like a little alcove off the main living room, I guess, of the rooming house. And it was a shabby little place with a little chest of drawers. I poked through the chest of drawers, looked through. I wanted to see what he lived like. I didn't find any revelations or anything like that. But I saw what it was like, this tiny little room. Then the landlord, and I forgot his name, he said, he read a lot. He said, I'd go in and change a light bulb or something every now and then. And he said, we'd talk, not very much. He wasn't very sociable. Incidentally, and if there's any reporters here, when somebody does something good and is suddenly in the news, people say, well, he didn't say much, but he was friendly. If he did something bad, they say, well, he didn't say very much, but he was surly. It's almost automatic. But he said, yeah, he read a little bit. We talked. She said, the landlady, Miss Johnson, said, every morning he got up, clockwork, 7 o'clock, went to the bathroom, cleaned himself up, and was out and took the Beckley bus, I think, to the school book depository. And the people who lived in the house with him, they were sitting in the room watching television, watching about their neighbor, who was accused of murdering the president. Anyway, that's where it as I said, I found a little bit I got some impression of what it was he had lived like.
Well, let's jump to Sunday. We're going to take a look at a video clip which should be familiar to all of you. Mickey Carroll was there in the midst of that, and we'll get his eyewitness account in just a moment.
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's a scuffle on the basement floor. It seems to concern photographers.
He has been shot. Oswald has been shot.
Lee Oswald.
Oswald has been shot.
We're going to switch now.
Police.
All right, what do you remember from that scene?
Well, the whole world saw that. Of the 12 jurors, one of whom is here.
Yep.
Mr.
Juror number 10 in the Jack Ruby trial. Wayman Rose, stand up so we can recognize you, Wayman.
There he is. See, I just wrote about this stuff. He was part of history. He was one of the jurors who can. But 11 of the 12 jurors had seen that scene on television. Well, let me tell you what it was like. I said the cops were likable and helpful, and we got up, and the Chief Curry, told us, the reporters who showed up, and we were, it was a very simple assignment, going to write a sentence saying, then the prisoner was taken by the police to the county jail. One sentence. So we got there, and then the chief said, well, look, we told you guys we were going to move him at, I think, 10:30, so we could have done it earlier. We want to cooperate with you, so we're still here. So Ike Pappas is the guy that, I don't know if you saw it in this clip, but Ike Pappas is the guy with the microphone wearing a trench coat who holds out a microphone for Ruby. Anyway, Ike and I and somebody else, and I don't we remember who the other guy was, but three of us decided we'd go upstairs to the 5th floor and see Oswald for a moment, because we could get downstairs faster than that elevator. It was a very creaky, slow elevator. So we went upstairs, and a couple of cops, like Lavelle, I guess, handcuffed to him, led Oswald out. And, well, we asked, I don't know, dumb question. I remember asking something about, did you have anything against Governor Connolly, blah, blah, blah. And he said something, and again, I don't remember what. And they put him on the elevator, and we ran downstairs. So we came out. They asked us for our, press cards. I had a New York one, and I guess that satisfied him. And we came out. There were 2 lines of reporters lined up getting ready to write this or do this one sentence. Later, the prisoner was taken to the county jail. So I stepped back against the wall. You can see me in some of the pictures, by the way. I look pretty much the same as I said. My hair wasn't white at that point. But I just have this sort of dumb, vacant look on my face because I was there to write my censor. Ike Pappas, standing, WNEW New York reporter, very, very good radio reporter, standing next to me. And as Oswald came out, Ike puts out his microphone. He says, "Lee, do you have anything to say?" Then at the trial, a few months later, at the trial, he played me his tape, and he speaks to Oswald, and then the next thing you hear is a little innocent little pop, like a firecracker. That's a gun. Then you hear a groan. That's Oswald, and then chaos. Lavelle and Oswald both are under and Ruby. They're all under a pile of cops, and there are people with guns and so forth around, and we get sorted out fairly quickly. The cops have taken Ruby upstairs. They've put Oswald in, I think it was an ambulance, but I don't remember whether it was an ambulance or just an ordinary station wagon or something. Anyway, they took him to Parkland Hospital, and he's dead by the time they get there. Then somebody came downstairs and said, well, it was a guy named Jack Ruby. And Ike Pappas said, I know Jack Ruby. He said, he gave me a card to a strip club. That's what he did. Ruby was all over the place that weekend. Partly he was a buff. Partly I think he was sort of half pretending to be a reporter and so forth. But anyway, I didn't remember him, although he was all over the pictures. But Ike said, yeah, he had given him the card. And so that's how we found out who Jack Ruby was.
And the FBI came to interview you because you were there in the basement.
Yeah, but the FBI, I'm not a big fan of the FBI, Steve. They were nice enough guys. I was working the Trib, and look, reporters report, right? I came back, and then I had to do something with Casey Stengel. I remember I had to do something with Tallulah Bankhead. So, reporting. But a couple of the FBI guys came and said, could they talk to me? And we sat down in the business news section of the Trib. And they asked me, everything I knew, and I didn't know anything. I knew as much, probably a little less than I'm telling you now. And so you called me, Steve, about this a few years ago, right? Yeah. And I remember, you said to me, well, we got what you told the FBI. I said, geez, what did I tell the FBI? I don't remember. And then so we talked a little bit, and I told the same, there I'm this dummy standing against the wall. You can see the pictures. That's what I told them. I was a dummy standing against the wall. And they were looking, at that point, look, Ruby shot Oswald, murdered in police headquarters. Cops, armed cops all around. It couldn't happen. I mean, it just couldn't. It's just unbelievable. So there all the talk about, conspiracy, blah, blah, was rife at that point. And they were trying to find out, had anybody been standing next to me speaking with a Russian accent or anything. But no, so what I told them was the very simple, I was there, blah, 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 blah.
Well, let's jump ahead now to the second time you came to Dallas. February of 1964, Jack Ruby goes on trial. It's called the Trial of the Century. You're down to cover it. What was that like?
Well, there had been look, Dallas had not gotten a very good press, let's face it. Dallas has the right-wing stuff that was prevalent. I'm not sure how widespread, but it was certainly prevalent. And so there were rumors they're not going to let you into the trial. They're going to only have friendly reporters and stuff. And it turned out not to be that way at all. Dallas was run by something called the City Citizens Council, I think it was, a group of businessmen. and they had done all sorts of good things. I mean, they were not democracy, obviously. This is like a collection of wise men, rich men, but they had done things like the city was desegregated, apparently quite peacefully, from what I can gather. They went out of their way to be nice to all of us who were there at the assassination, and then when we came down for the trial, they went out of their way once again to be nice. There was a guy named Sam Bloom, was like he was the PR guy for the establishment, and they lined up stuff. They welcomed you. They gave you little badges. They had they set a thing. I think it was called the lunacy courtroom or something like that. But anyway, they set aside a courtroom where Western Union people could send the reports out, where we could type and work. Judge Joe B. Brown, who had a reputation in Dallas as not being the brightest judge that ever came along, and he had his very small courtroom. Well, they opened up a big courtroom, and he turned out, by the way, to be a perfectly nice guy, as far as I could tell. And so they went out of their way to welcome us, to be nice. You couldn't drink in Dallas. Can you drink in Dallas now? I don't know. But you couldn't then, and you had to belong to a club or something. So they made us all members of the Dallas Press Club, and we were welcomed. You know, so Dallas went out of its way to try to get good press for a change. I mean, after a city where the president had been murdered, and then where in a totally unbelievable scenario, the murderer had been killed in the middle of police headquarters.
Melvin Belli was Jack Ruby's defense attorney from San Francisco, a very flamboyant individual. What can you tell us about Melvin Belli?
Well, if you know, anybody who's ever covered trials know that the big deal defense lawyers are all showboats and larger than life. And Belli was a larger than life people. Life magazine had written a story about him, called him the King of Torts, because he specialized in these great big malpractice things, and he was a very, very good lawyer. He was also a showboat, but that, as I said, is well, that's what those kind of guys are. As it turned out, Belli had made a deal to write a book, because he wasn't going to get paid anything by the Ruby family, to write a book about the trial. And he and the guy who was going to write the book had some sort of a fight. I don't know. But my editor at the Trib, Dick Schaap, was plugged into everybody, wrote books, did television, and he said, "Gee, I got a guy there that could write it." Well, so at the end of the trial, after the trial was over, if I was covering a trial, I couldn't be involved with anybody in it. But Dick made the deal so that I would write Belli's book, and I did. And look, here, I'm a nobody, right? A young kid newspaper reporter, and Belli is a famed and very wealthy trial lawyer. But the deal was, well, there are two things. One, it was a $10,000 book contract, which sounded pretty, it's pretty good money, right? Belli said, we'll split it down the middle. Now, that was nice of him. You know, who was I? It was his book, but we split it down the middle, and the literary agency, Sterling Lord, they knew Belli, and so they wrote a contract that said he couldn't change a comma of anything I wrote, and so you'd figure but we didn't have a fight. He didn't make any argument at all about that. He said at one point, almost diffidently, he said, would you mind if I wrote a paragraph? Yeah, magnanimously. I said, yeah, go ahead, write a paragraph. And he did. So he wrote the paragraph about why he took the case and so forth. But other than that, we've talked about this, Steve. He always said he wanted to be a doctor. And it came at the jailbreak was when that came out to an extent. But anyway, so I'd get phone calls at home in New Jersey, 4 o'clock in the morning from Tijuana, Mexico, or God knows where. Dr. Carroll, this is Dr. Belli. And then he just wanted to talk. But he, you know, and Dallas, of course, he was the villain. He was the anti-Dallas. But in that sense, he had to do. He was a defense lawyer. His job was to get his client off. So part of it was to get the trial out of Dallas, where there's been all this prejudicial publicity and blah, 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 blah. So he Well, he got a bad rep in Dallas, but he wasn't a bad guy. And our juror friend here said that the judge had to keep telling him, because Belli was really good in the courtroom. I remember the first thing, I had never met him before. The first day we're there, he comes in, and you know how it's like a guy looking over the territory. He sort of looked over, opened opened his coat, and it was a big red-lined coat. Wow. And then our juror friend here said that Judge Brown had to keep telling him, stay away from it, because Belli would walk up to the jury box and lean on the front and talk, and he wasn't supposed to get that close to you guys, right? So anyway, he was he was a flamboyant guy who was in my dealings with him was a very decent, really sort of just a pleasant guy.
We're going to hear from Melvin Belli. March 14th, 1964, the verdict is read. Ruby is found guilty of murder with malice for shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, and this is what Melvin Belli, Ruby's defense attorney, had to say. Let's see.
Make these people of Dallas ashamed of themselves.
What's your next step, Mr. Belli?
Appeal.
Where?
Appeal. Today.
Mr. Belli, I don't like to make you repeat this, but the live camera just got here a few moments.
Railroad? This is a kangaroo railroad. And every one of you know it, too.
What's your...
I hope the people of Dallas are proud of this jury that was shoved down our throat. One juror, before he sat on that jury, told his employee that if he got on the Ruby jury, he'd vote the death penalty. Another juror waved at the policeman when they were on the witness stand. Her nephew does the public relations work for the police department.
How do you feel about Judge Brown? How do you think he handled the case? Mr. Belli, your opinion on Judge Brown?
He went down the line for every motion that the district attorney made, and they led him into some 30 errors. And every Texas jurist knows this thing was the greatest railroading kangaroo court disgrace in the history of American law.
They disregarded your entire psychiatric case?
They disregard every bit of our psychiatric testimony. They disregarded every witness who was sworn. And you heard last night when those jurors looked at us and said, we don't want to have any argument. We've had our mind made up. Now, that was the nod when the judge said, do you want to go ahead? They didn't even want recess. Why, in a civilized country in the heart of darkest Africa, you wouldn't argue a man's life starting at 12 o'clock in the morning. When I think we're coming into Holy Week and Good Friday to have a sacrifice like this, I think we're back 2,000 years. And the blight that's on Dallas with those 12 people who announced a death penalty in this case, they'll make this a city of shame forevermore. And I'm going to participate in it, too, when I write this appeal.
Mr. Belli, Mr. Tannehill, your associate is a Texan. What's your reaction to it?
It's a violent miscarriage of justice.
Anything else to add to that, Mr. Tannehill?
I'm about to throw up.
All right, so angry words there from Melvin Belli. So when you wrote the book, and this is it, Dallas Justice, you interviewed Belli. Was he as vehement in his criticism of Dallas at that time?
No. Look, in the first place, he was a defense lawyer, and his job was to get the guy off. That's number one. I didn't see any of that because I was in the courtroom working, talking to Ruby's family and talking to everybody. I don't know. We couldn't talk to the jury, obviously, because they got you guys out of there instantly. But so, yeah, he in the courtroom, he hollered something about, Jack, we'll get you off, we'll blah, 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 we'll appeal, which they did, and they eventually, the Texas Supreme Court did eventually go along months later with the change of venue. But, when we wrote the book, he was A, he didn't like to lose. Nobody does, and this was a pretty big case. B, he got fired by the Ruby family, about a couple of days afterwards. They figured he hadn't done a good job. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But, so he was defensive and so forth. When we talked about, in putting together the book, he was also conscious that this would be read, and so he went out of his way to say nice things about Dallas to counter some of that stuff. So, who knows what his opinions really were. I don't know.
If you have questions for Mr. Carroll, if you'll pass your question cards to the end of your rows, we will collect those and try to go through as many as we can. And I actually have some from our program yesterday that I can add to the stack as well. Now, you've written 50 years after Dallas Justice, you've written another book, Accidental Assassin, and that's the one we have available here today. Now, tell us about, what does that mean, accidental assassin?
Yeah, and that's good because I forgot to mention it earlier. Look, the 9/11 report came out, remember? And it was clear, and you could tell what happened, and it was beautifully written. The Warren Commission, after years and years and years of this conspiracy stuff, and I expect usually at a thing like this is a couple of conspiracy experts who want to tell me that I'm wrong. But the fact is the conspiracy stuff is baloney. It didn't happen. But the only written record of what did happen is the Warren Commission, and it is unreadable. 888 turgid pages. It's all there, and they're right, but you can't read it. So I thought, good Lord, let's at least in a simple way, I hope this thing would get a few school libraries or something so that people will just be able to tell, this is what happened. Accidental assassin? Okay. Sunday morning, November 24th. Ruby is in the Western Union headquarters sending a money order to a girl, Little Lynn, was one of the stripteasers in his club. And so he stands in line, does his paperwork. A guy named Doyle Lane, I think his name was, the Western Union guy, timestamp on it, 11/17. So Ruby walks out the door, and he sees a little bit of a crowd around police headquarters. So out of curiosity, he wanders over. Now, he walks in. Did they let him in because they knew it's just Jack Ruby and everybody knows him? Or did he, as I think is more probable, as a car was coming out, he walked in and did they just not see him as he went by? In any event, he walks in, goes down the ramp, coming toward him is Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who has murdered the president that he adored, and Ruby pulls out a gun, shoots him. 11:21, 4 minutes. So in other words, if the mafia or the Cubans or the you name it had plotted and we're going to send this guy in to murder the murderer, 4 minutes from being a placid customer to an actor in the assassination of the president. It was an accident, totally. That's why I called it accidental assassin. I hope, look, probably some of you have to. I don't care if you read the book, but there should be, I don't make any money out of it, but there should be some understanding of what the events simply were. And the Warren Commission, distinguished people, but boy, they wrote a lousy report.
This is the cover of the book, and I just want to point out you're in this photograph.
Oh, yeah,
there you are right there in the corner.
No, you can't have no white hair at that point, but it's an equally dumb look, There I am, one sentence. Later, the prisoner was taken to county headquarters, to the county jail.
Well, we have a nice stack of questions here. Let me go through a couple of these. There was a jailbreak during the Ruby trial. Did you witness that?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. The jail, I was talking to our juror friend. He said the jury found out about it a day later. It was you that found out, I think. You saw the headline. But in any event, look, the county courthouse, right around the corner here. The county courthouse, the trial is on the second floor, and upstairs in the back is the county jail. Some very bad guys decided to stage a jailbreak out of there. Now, they did stuff that, I forgot who it was. It was you that told me, Steve, I always thought that they took it's stuff you saw in the comic books when you were a kid, a raw potato and colored it with shoe polish to make it look like a gun. It wasn't a potato. It was a
bar of soap.
A bar of soap. Okay. Anyway, they come down now. They come down and they get out of the elevator on the second floor. Now, the photographers, don't forget, this is where there's a trial now of a guy who murdered somebody in the basement at Dallas Police Headquarters. The photographers have tricked up the corridor with TV lights in case anything happens. They come out, and there's a woman captive. She doesn't know it's a bar of soap. She thinks it's a gun. The guy's got his arm around her and is walking down the corridor. So as they walk, the jailbreak starts going down the corridor, and somebody flicks on the lights. So about, maybe 10 or 12 paces behind the jailbreak comes photographers. Click, 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 click. They go down. The trial, the courtroom is on the second floor. And you go up a marble staircase, and it's a big, spectator event in Dallas, right? People want to go to the trial. So they line up along they're lined up along the staircase. They won't get out of the way. They'll move over to the side, but they won't give up their place in the line. So the jailbreak goes right by these people hunched over across the banisters. They get outside, and there was a guy, I can't remember his name. I remember what he looked like. He's a fierce Wild West mustache. He worked for the sheriff. Well, he was a typist in the sheriff's office. But a gutsy guy, as it turns out, because he had been out to lunch. The jailbreak comes down, and he steps in front of the guy with the bar of soap that he thinks is a gun, and he puts out his hand. And I guess the guy decided, this is not much of a jailbreak, because he gave him the gun. And they picked them all. A few of them got off someplace. I think within a couple of days they had the whole pack of them. And the funny thing, the juror, they're walking. Bo was walking you to lunch, I guess, the next day. And as you went by, he told me, he said, he sees this headline on the paper, it's a jailbreak. He said, what's a jailbreak? And he goes, oops, you're not supposed to see that. And then when they finally sent you the newspapers, which you got, newspapers, there was a big story clipped out. That was the story.
And of course, that brought even more criticism upon Dallas.
Eric Johnson was mayor by then. He had been head of Texas Instruments, and I did an interview with him for Bob Byrd because he was the one who was in charge of the Kennedy reception out at the Trademark. And Johnson is now the mayor, and I mean, A, president murdered, B, murderer murdered in police headquarters, and now a jailbreak outside the trial. I mean, Dallas didn't look good in the headlines. And Johnson said something like, he said, people probably criticize Dallas now. He said, can't win them all. I suppose it was a bit unfair, but the Daily News in New York had specialized in bright, clever headlines. You know what the headline was on the jailbreak? The jailbreak was, "Oh, Dallas," with an exclamation point.
Someone here would like to hear your account of the funeral for Officer J.D. Tippit.
Oh, okay. We skipped that, and Patrolman Tippit had been murdered by Oswald, shortly, an hour or so after he murdered the president. And Tippit stopped it's not clear exactly why, but Oswald's walking along. Tippit stopped the car. Oswald came out to talk to him and then killed him, shot him. And just before the funeral, the cops cops are very, very touchy about somebody who kills a cop, right? And so they picked him up, they brought him into headquarters, and in headquarters, of course, obviously they were working on the assassination of the president. And it was either the chief or the homicide I don't remember which one, says to these cops are walking, he said, now look, he said, I want you to get a search warrant for an apartment of a guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. They knew it. And the cops they said, we'll save you the trouble, Chief. Here he is. Anyway, so then on Monday, when Kennedy's funeral was on everybody's television, I was in Dallas, so I went out to cover the Tippit funeral, and it was very moving. I remember my lead said something like, here too, there was a tall, slim woman and it was, Mrs. Tippit was very, very, she was a pretty woman, as I recall, tall brunette with 3 kids, they were dignified, but obviously tremendously moved. And I'm Catholic, so I'm accustomed to more elaborate church ceremonies. This was a Protestant Beckley Baptist Church, yeah. And it was a nice funeral. It was, if you can have such a thing. There were cops who had worked with Tippit and liked him, and they said nice things about him. The widow was gracious, but stricken, obviously. The kids were just confused, the way kids would be. And it was, it sounds silly, but it was a nice, a moving kind of funeral. With those, I'm, again, Catholic. Those Protestant hymns that all sound like Moonlight Bay, the soft, well, but it was nice. I mean, it was nice music and a moving kind of ceremony. And the minister gave a rather simple thing. Tippit, blah, blah, born such and such, died in such and such Texas, died such and such. And it was, as I said, I was moved by it.
Our last question today, since it's been 50 years since you have been to Dallas, what do you think of the city today?
I didn't hate it then. Dallas, from what I can gather, it's a richer, all these great big, sometimes ugly glass buildings and so forth. Clearly, it's physically it's changed, and from what you tell me, Steve, it's changed a lot psychologically too. And those reporters tend to judge a place, if they haven't been there, by its newspapers. And the Dallas Morning News in those days was always professional. It was well written, it was well laid out. They put out a professional newspaper, but it was defensive. It was like there was this us against the world attitude in Dallas. And from what I understand, from what you've told me now, that the population has changed, the right-wing stuff, and there had been a lot of it. They roughed up Lyndon Johnson during the campaign. Somebody hit Adlai Stevenson over the head with a picket sign when he came here to give a speech. There was a big full-page ad of a scurrilous ad, welcome Kennedy when in the Dallas News, paid for, not theirs, when the president came in. So there was a lot of we were told this is a crazy right-wing place, and the Democrats, the Kennedy people, thought it was. The president himself, in Schlesinger's book, comments to somebody or other about, look what they did, about the ad. So they're, but as far as I can tell, as I said, they went out of their way to be nice to us when we came back to cover the trial. So I didn't have any negative vibes then, so I guess I don't now either. Everybody seems nice now, except they don't know how to make Eggs Benedict in the what you call it, the Adolphus Hotel. So that I objected.
Well, that is all the time we have today, but Mickey Carroll will be over at that table in the corner signing copies of his book, Accidental Assassin. It's not available on Amazon, so if you're interested in getting a copy, today would be the day. You can get it autographed. Please join me in thanking Mickey Carroll for sharing his story with us today.